the head of high school suggested an alternative, which was that I should only share white conservative views on race. So I should only have conservatives who had white skin,
Unbelievable.
since that would not confuse or inflame the students.
I'm Dave Rubin, and joining me today is a teacher and educator at Grace Church School in New York City who recently wrote a piece on Bari Weiss's Substack titled, "I Refuse to Stand By While My Students Are Indoctrinated." And then you can guess what happened next. Cancel culture came to his door. Paul Rossi, welcome to the Rubin Report.
Thank you, Dave. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. So I've wanted to chat with you since I read the piece, and we're going to link to the piece below, and I hope everyone will read it. But for people watching right now that have no idea about any of this, can you sort of sum up the piece first, and then we'll kind of get into everything that's happened since then?
Sure. Basically, for the last, I'd say, 4 to 5 years, there's been an increasing change in the culture of the school as it started to implement what it calls its anti-racist programming in the grades that in the high school that I teach, so grades 9 through 12 there. And I've noticed like a series of very concerning things were happening there, and basically a stifling of expression, to the point where kids were afraid to be silent. They were expected to say the right things. If they didn't say the right things, they were flagged as problematic in emails. And a lot of this was designed to sort of create a certain culture, a culture that's based on critical race theory, essentially. So, I started to hear complaints from some students in the school, some of my own students, some who weren't my students, that this was becoming extremely uncomfortable and difficult, and really poisoning the atmosphere in the school. And I witnessed some things myself in meetings that were segregated by race. So we would frequently have whites only meetings and BIPOC meetings. Black, Indigenous, people of color meetings. And so as there was also a proliferation of opt-in affinity groups, so basically this notion that, individual opinions and ideas had to conform to your sort of racial group and gender group. And, when things differed from that, it was seen as, anomalous or, not representative of what you should think. And I had some experiences in classes that I teach. I'm a math teacher primarily, but I also teach a persuasion class where some of the students in that class complained of having sort of a bubble mentality, and they weren't getting any of the other types of opinions. So I suggested to my head of high school that, maybe we could talk about, we could bring in some of the ideas of Professor Glenn Lowry at Brown, a Brown economist. I'm sure you're familiar with his ideas, because the students, a lot of our discussion focused around the protests and riots over the summer. So they wanted to maybe hear an alternative opinion. But I was told by my head of high school that it would be extremely problematic and disruptive if to students of color and other students if I shared a conservative views of a black man.
Right. To be clear, he happens to be a black conservative.
He happens to be a black. That was not even in my initial proposal. It was simply that he has certain views on race and the racial issues that may differ slightly from what Grace Church School is pushing, sort of a center right, but still very mainstream. If you look at the opinions throughout the country. And the head of high school suggested an alternative, which was that I should only share white conservative views on race. So I should only have conservatives who had white skin,
Unbelievable.
Since that would not confuse or inflame the students. So this, I didn't even respond to that email. I wound up not even teaching that unit at all. And I was so disgusted by that response, which I just see as self-evidently racist, the notion that ideas should be filtered, the dissemination of ideas should be filtered based on the color of the skin of the person who's speaking them. And it's just completely anti-intellectual and regressive, in my opinion. Subsequent to that, there was a self-care meeting during the pandemic, which was ostensibly designed to help students cope with the struggles and problems with being at home, stuck, maybe they're not able to come to school more than twice a week. And, in this meeting, up came the white supremacy slide, saying that some of the characteristics of white supremacy culture included things like objectivity and individualism, and most interestingly enough, a right to comfort. So in the meeting, which was supposed to be, the segregated whites-only meeting, that was supposed to be teaching students how to feel, more comfortable with the events that were surrounding them, they were told that if they were white, they should, question their right to comfort, which I found the height of irony. Yeah. Then the facilitator, who was actually very nice, we got along quite well, I thought, asked the group of 200 students and maybe 30 of my colleagues, whether they might be feeling a white feeling around these topics. And at that point, I decided to question what that actually meant, a white feeling, what makes a feeling white. And it was, I was a little miffed and concerned because I thought that this was blatantly racist, but I was going to try to present my questions in a way that was, that wasn't antagonistic. And later she did speak to me and tell me that she didn't feel that my questions were, offered in bad faith or anything. So what I wanted to do by asking the question was to open up the discourse a little bit so that students may see me as an example and maybe model for them that it's okay to question ideas. It's okay to have different viewpoints. And that's exactly what happened. So students in the chat window of the Zoom meeting started to ask, a broader range of questions. Even faculty joined in with some questions of their own. The facilitator allowed it. There were a lot of questions against capitalism, so I put my own idea about capitalism in there, which was that capitalism is extremely anti-racist since it's done more to lift people out of poverty, lift non-white people out of poverty than any other, of its competitors. Some of the questions that I put in also question the nature of racial identification at all. Like, why should I identify as white? Why should I introject an identity based on how other people see me? Why is that necessary? And so that comment and some others made their way out of the meeting, sort of violating the norm of confidentiality to some folks that were not in the whites-only meeting, and caused some concern and agitation. And then they had to have meetings about the meetings. And then it was sort of a week and a half of upheaval, processing. People felt harmed. I was brought in to to speak to my head of school and the assistant head of school. And I was, asked, how I felt about what I had done. And I actually felt great. So I said, I'm not contrite. I apparently people are claiming that I've caused harm, but no one has come to me to express this harm. And they couldn't even explain the causality of how my questions could have caused the harm in the first place. And they kept raising the stakes when they noticed that I wasn't contrite. And they said, well, you've caused grievous harm, you've disturbed the student's peace of mind, and that at the end, when I wasn't contrite, they said, it's raised to the level of harassment. And at that point, I just ended the meeting. I had a subsequent meeting with the head of the whole school, and he reiterated his disappointment. He had some pretextual reasons for being upset, but clearly what was causing the problems in the school were the nature of my questions, not necessarily some of the pretextual things that surrounded it.
Sure. If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about academia instead of nonstop yelling, check out our academia playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, check out our full episode playlist. They're all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.